is Hitman 3 in HDR, but the HDR is not native. This HDR is being done through Special K. There are some benefits of doing HDR through Special K. One is that it hooks into the game engine itself. A lot of game engines that are SDR are actually HDR. The reason that they don't have HDR is because the developer hasn't gone in and configured and added settings and enabled all these HDR modes to work with the game. But the engine it runs on, or I should say the technology stack it runs on, like DirectX, allows for 16-bit color numbers, and those 16-bit numbers can do HDR. Like, this is a 10-bit color that I'm doing here. Wow. Come on, that background is really blurry. Is it gonna load in? No? If I get closer to it. Oh, there it goes. Okay, that's really strange why it's taking so long. I think it's because I'm recording, though, because the frame rate is extremely low. Like, lower than it normally would be. I should be getting 70, something like that on my 3090 here. See, there's a reflection here. Yeah, there you go. You get some HDR in that reflection there. If you're watching this in SDR, it's being tone mapped. You're not going to see everything, but you should see a relative difference between SDR and HDR. I can show you what SDR looks like. I can only do this with Special K. Something's wrong, because it looks like the right side is better. It's just, but it's over contrasted. I don't know how to explain it. There's too much contrast on the right side, but it looks really good. What is wrong with this? I'm supposed to be showing you that it looks bad in SDR, and now it looks amazing, except the contrast is too high, as you can see in those people in the crowd. But this looks like it has a haze over it. This looks like it was without the haze. What the heck? I mean, I've never seen that before. Usually you pull this across and it looks dim on the right side. Well, we can check out some bits of HDR. So some things are clipping, or they're being viewed outside of the range, like the sky. Nope. Just the stuff on the ground here. No, it's just changing because of the water. But these pieces over here, as you can see, these like rainbow pieces, I think it's rainbow because it's showing outside of the range. So this is basically peaking. On any of these spots here, it's peaking. I don't know what it considers peaking. I don't know any of that. I think it's peaking on those. My monitor can actually get a little bit brighter than this, but I want to see how this works with OBS. I mean, it looks good. Looks really good. Normally, if you want to put an HDR game in SDR, what you got to do is take this paper white and the peak white. I think you lower them all the way, and then you're seeing what it looks like in SDR. So something like, no, reset this. This has to be like 80. I think, if I'm correct, I think this is what it would normally look like in SDR. So this is what SDR looks like. Like, it looks bright, right? But it's very dark. The whole game is dim and dark. I don't even know if 200 nits is correct, or it's actually running at something like 80 nits, which this is a little dark for me because I'm in HDR mode. I mean, this looks great right here, but then you can turn up your paper white and you get a little bit more. I swear it's something like this. Yeah. This looks like SDR to me. There's no detail in that sun. Everything looks washed out. Usually your eyes will eventually adjust to SDR and it'll look okay to you. But to me, it just looks bad. This looks like it's got some kind of haze over it. Does this show up correctly? I don't know what this slider is doing anymore. Oh my god. It's not supposed to be doing this. It's not supposed to be like lifting the veil. It's supposed to be the other way around. Oh, something's really broken. Alright, so this is the one I like to use, because this fits best with my screen. Yeah, this looks so much better. Special K even allows you to take screenshots of this game. You can't normally take screenshots of Hitman 3 because when you try to take a screenshot, it shows this like gray haze over the screen from the Xbox game bar. I would show you what the Xbox game bar looks like, but it does not record with the game capture in OBS. But if I disable the game capture and move to the Windows capture, you should be able to see it, although I was having an issue with alt-tabbing. Now I can't get back to the game. Okay, so this is a recent issue that I've run into, but I would like to show you what the Xbox game bar looks like. It looks like this. Yeah. No, you can't see it. You absolutely can't see it. All right, that's fine. That's fine. I'll close the game. So now what I want to do is disable Special K. All right, so it is currently disabled, I think. And I'm going to load up Hitman with Auto HDR mode. And how do I load it with Auto HDR? You just got to make sure in the game the HDR is set to off and your computer, the Windows computer, is in HDR mode. There's a hotkey for this in Windows 11. Windows key Alt-B will put you into HDR mode in Windows. So now we're running in Auto HDR. Now what Auto HDR is a way of Windows upscaling your SDR to HDR. That's essentially what it is. In most cases, it looks amazing. In some cases that I found, it looks bad. The color grading's off. There's some clear issues with it, but I still want to show what it looks like because I think it's really comparable. If you want to set up Special K, this is a great way to get HDR in games that don't have it. Like, it really is HDR, 100%, but it's SDR scaled up to HDR. And if your Windows settings are changed in a certain way, then those also affect your Auto HDR settings. So if Windows is in 10-bit color for SDR, then you'll get 10-bit color to work with, so you'll have less problems when it tries to upscale it. But if Windows is an 8-bit color in SDR, which is typically what you would see, then when Auto HDR only has 8 bits of color to work with per channel and not 10 bits of color. Okay, we're back in Auto HDR. I can definitely tell this is an HDR. It is very bright. It's being tone mapped in the preview window in OBS, which is also very cool that it can real-time tone map it. Now I should be able to go to Miami here and show the same scene we saw before, but how it looks in Auto HDR. You're probably not really going to be able to tell a difference, but there is a difference. I can notice it. It's more apparent in other games. Hitman works great with Auto HDR. Some other things about Auto HDR is it automatically tone maps. So if the HDR implementation in a game goes to 10,000 nit, for instance, and your monitor is not a TV, which is pretty typical for computer monitors, then what's going to happen is it's going to be clipping all over the place. You can fix that clipping by literally just loading up the game with SDR mode while HDR is turned on in Windows, and Auto HDR will be enabled, typically. It doesn't always enable. There are some games like The Ascent where it doesn't enable for some reason. When you enable Auto HDR, what that does is it allows Windows to tone map for you. All HDR is tone mapped. SDR is tone map HDR. HDR is also tone map HDR. Unless you have a monitor capable of 10,000 nits, most likely you're tone mapping. And it's not even just 10,000 nits. The color values in DirectX 11 and 12 and possibly other ones too are 16-bit. And I'm only using 10-bit color here. Now, 16-bit doesn't mean you have higher color depth or anything. What it means is there are numbers in there, and there's lighting in the game engine, which is how Special K works in the first place. Special K hooks into that. Games already have HDR. It just allows you to see the HDR-ness before it gets downscaled to SDR. And I don't want to say downscaled. That's not really the right terminology. It's tone mapped to what they call low dynamic range. And Auto HDR essentially upscales it back as best it can. But it's not perfect because it's not actually HDR. It's working off an SDR source. But look how good this is. That lighting, that's so bright there. The sky looks really good. You can't see it, but if I took a picture of this in SDR mode, that sky would just be completely white. It would be blown out. And I can tell because I can take screenshots. And I can take those screenshots and then look at them in a tool. So if I took a screenshot right now of this, just to show you what's going on this monitor, I have Auto HDR enabled, I have HDR enabled, and I also have my content brightness here down to 20. Because when I go back and forth between HDR being on and off, this is about the place where HDR and SDR brightness in Windows seems to match. And so I keep it here. But as far as I know, this does affect your Auto HDR tone mapping, but I'm not 100% sure of that because if we open that image that I took in Hitman, yeah, you can see right here, it's just blown out white up in the top in this area. But if you open it, even without the tone map here, it correctly shows the sky. And that's because this is a max of 616 nits. Now, if you watch any content in Windows 10, in your monitors, let's say is 400 nits peak brightness, this will be blown out for you. But if you're in Windows 11, it tone maps everything, even Chrome, down to your monitor's reported peak brightness. So the way to find that is in your display, and I go over to, not for that one, but for this one, and I go down to advanced display. Not only can you set the refresh rate here, but you can also see what mode it's in. So you can see it's in 10-bit color right now, it's in high dynamic range mode, and the peak brightness is reported as 604 nits. And if you see this app, it's saying my peak brightness for this display is 603. Now, this display can get up to 740 nits peak brightness, but right now it's reporting to Windows 604, so everything gets tone mapped. So my peak brightness is 604 nits here, but that's not the actual monitor's peak brightness. It's something like 760 for this particular display, and it's showing here 604. That's fine. That's just what it reports to Windows. I can go and change this if I want to, but I'm going to leave it because I don't want to mess with it. But this is your reported. Now on my LG C1 OLED TV, it reports 1499, which is the default value if no peak brightness is reported. Well, I had to go into the custom resolution utility tool and edit for that particular display the peak brightness value, which is in values of 0 to 256. And I don't necessarily know what the values correspond to, but as far as I know, a value of 128 is 800, and that's what I've set it to. Now that monitor doesn't quite do 800, but it doesn't matter. I don't mind if I peak in very small places. It's close enough. You have to set the peak brightness for your display so Windows understands what it's working with, and that allows it to tone map. Tone mapping is very important. So you're basically taking a scene that has more peak brightness than your display has, and you're tone mapping it down to something that fits into your display. Either that's into SDR mode or into HDR mode. And some applications are developed inside an SDR space, or an SDR container, so to speak, where they only really look good in SDR. As soon as you go to HDR, they don't look so good because the colors don't map correctly. It's not a one-to-one mapping of the colors. And also 10-bit and HDR are two completely different technologies. 10-bit just happens to be what we're using when HDR is enabled, but it doesn't have to be 10-bit color. You could have 8-bit with dithering. You could just have 8-bit color. It doesn't matter. The reason we don't do 8-bit with HDR is because HDR widens the color spectrum so much. And because it widens the color spectrum so much, you'll start to see banding all over the place with 8-bit color. But with 10-bit color, you start to see less of that banding or none at all. And then the standards also go up to 12-bit and 16-bit, and the game engines are 16-bit. So there's a lot of headroom left to play with inside the game's actual HDR implementation. Now, what I want to show you is what the game looks like with native HDR. Now, this is a little bit weird because I have to configure this HDR setting myself. This game, like a lot of others, has native HDR, but the native HDR is something that I manually configured myself by hand. I had to go in there and tweak the setting to fit my display, and I went online to this site, HDR Gamer, and I figured out what the values are for HDR to properly display with this game for my display. So it's like, if you want this many peak brightness, this is the setting you set it to. I always thought you had to have some kind of special laser thing to measure it, but you can just use that app I was using before, WCG plus HDR Viewer. If you use that app and you take a screenshot, it will tell you the peak brightness of the screenshot. The problem is this game, when you take a screenshot with the Xbox game bar, which is the only way to take HDR screenshots in Windows, is Windows key Alt print screen, as long as that game bar is enabled, then you get this gray haze over the entire screen. You don't get an accurate depiction of the peak brightness. That's why Special K is important. Special K allows for passing through HDR, so you can use the game's native HDR with Special K, and as long as Special K is running, it does allow you to take screenshots, so that's really nice. So this is native HDR. Already I can tell you it's darker. If I took a screenshot, I can go measure it. Once we get to the clouds, I'll go take a screenshot and see what the peak brightness is. This is much darker already. Everything seems darker. Am I even in HDR? Let me see. If I look at the reflection on this building, I can tell you. Okay, let's take a picture of this just like I did before. Oh, I can't take a screenshot because I'm not using Special K. If I was using Special K, I could take the screenshot and show you what the native HDR looks like. And now I've lost access to the game. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is definitely a lot more toned down, but that's HDR for sure. I can see it on that reflection there. That's bright, but it's not that bright. There's also some good scenes I've seen when I've gone inside. You wouldn't think in a dark room that you'd have HDR. When I've gone over here where they're looking at this car, there are some bright lights like these down here. There's some bright lights on the wall here that would normally be peaking. There's some bright lights over there in the ceiling, right in this area. There are a bunch of bright lights there. I don't mind if those clip because I don't really care about those lights. I'd rather get the whole scene brighter, but that's what it is. So if I go into HDR here, this is the configuration menu I'm talking about. I had to go in here, enable it, and then set max intensity. From what I read, this is what I want it to. I don't use what this is showing me. So this is showing me some white box in here. It looks great for me. I can see that there's a gray box and a white box. But if I turn this up, then I'm going to start getting clipping, but I can't record it because I can't take screenshots without Special K running. That's a problem. So I want to show you what native HDR looks like with Special K running. So I can show you what that screenshot is and then tell you what the peak brightness is. But first I got to get the game to close. Okay, so last time I tried this, it didn't work right, but let's find out. So I'm going to undisable Special K. I'm going to run the game in native HDR mode with Special K running. And let's see if this works correctly. Okay, great. It's working. Fantastic. It's already darker. I can tell something's wrong. So I'm going to set this as the first preset here and set it to pass through. And you can up the paper white luminance, but 80 is correct as the default. If I up this, I can make it brighter. Ah, it's not changing anything. That's great. It might be because I'm in the menu though. So this is what the game normally would look like. Oh, what's this thing? Black level. I don't know. Ubisoft games. Huh. Nothing's changing. I wonder if that, yeah, that doesn't even exist here. Huh. But if I do this, you just get black. So that's interesting. That's what you should get. I can't up the paper white. Well, I thought I could up the paper white even when it was in the native HDR mode. Oh well. Now we can take a screenshot of that sky and compare it to the Auto HDR version of it and see how they compare in terms of peak brightness with how I've configured the game, which is going to be about 740 or 760 nits of peak brightness. I don't know why sometimes this game is having that's now. I put it on a faster drive. One of those NVMe 7,000 megabytes per second drive. I have no clue why it took so long to get the textures loaded. Must be something with the ray tracing or recording mode or anything I'm doing. Okay, so we're seeing this back here. Gotta get up to this right there. Take a screenshot of it. Okay, I took a screenshot. And the only reason I can do this is because Special K is running. I don't get a grayed out screenshot. Actually, in fact, I'm not. Oh, this is what messed it up last time. Okay, well, everything's frozen up on my end. It's not frozen up, it's just not letting me get access to, there we go, it crashed. Perfect, that's fine. I needed that screenshot, that's all I cared about. This is the Special K version, and I think this one of these is the Auto HDR. Like, this one's really dim. That one's definitely me trying to take an HDR screenshot. Aha, this is Auto HDR. Okay, great. I'm gonna put these side by side so you can see the difference. It looks like this is the native HDR over here on the side. This is the Auto HDR. Auto HDR, the peak brightness is 616 nits because it's tone mapping everything. Don't worry about this tone map. It has nothing to do with it. This one is the native HDR. It's only showing 380 nits here, which is probably what it should be, but it's not as bright as the left. And I like the peak brightness on the left side here. I do remember taking some screenshots in native HDR and I was getting about 400 something nits, 400, almost 500. It could be that I've just configured it wrong. It could be that the website I went to doesn't correctly explain how to configure the HDR in this game. I'm just showing you that with Auto HDR, it does it all for you, which is really nice, but I'm not recommending it over native. I'm absolutely not recommending it over native. Native will be a better presentation overall. In this particular case, it is an inferior version of it because it's not reaching the peak brightness that I really should be getting in native when the clouds, which are, as far as I know, some of the brightest areas of the scene, part of the scene here. And if we look down here in the luminance heat map, you can also see the differences in the scene. You can see that over here, the blue is SDR and the green should be a little bit SDR. And then the yellow, as far as I know, is also somewhat SDR, but you really start getting the big HDR stuff when you're getting this orange here. And this does not have hardly any deep orange like this side. So that's the difference you can see between them. And I'll just show you real quick. This one says draw SDR as color. So you can see where it's out of the SDR range. That's what's in color right now, which is this guy here. And then some of these little objects in the menu are out of SDR range. And that's why they have some color to them instead of black and white or grayscale. Also, the reflections on these dolphins are showing like that. You can see it in both views. I really like how much brighter this is. I just need to tweak the settings in the game in native HDR to fix that. It should fix that problem. Hopefully this is pretty cool to show you some bits of HDR and what you have to go through to understand how it works in games, because it's not going to be that easy to understand. There's a lot of things going on. One is the native HDR implementation in the game. Another is Special K, which can just be a pass-through and not do anything, but it does allow you to take screenshots of the games. And you do not want to use Special K in multiplayer games like Elden Ring because they have easy anti-cheat and they do not let you use Special K, even though it does let you take screenshots, which is really nice. You have to do it in single player only in that particular game. Special K also has its own HDR modes, which you can configure however you like. So now I'm going to use Special K to configure the HDR in this game. And I'm going to take a screenshot of that and show you what that looks like. See if we can get some HDR as soon. I can already see it. Yeah, right there, that thing, that reflection. Down here, there's very little HDR, mostly in the back. When I say HDR, what I mean is stuff outside of the SDR range. Colors and light, well, it's just colors outside of the SDR range. Okay, so we're looking at the sky. This is looking really nice. Oh, it looks so good. I like it when it's bright. Let's do this. I'll get over here. I think one of them I had taken it back here. So I'll take that screenshot from back here. And then the other I had taken it like right here without the water in my face. Oh, I turned it up. Can you stop with the water? No? I'll just move over here. Okay, it looks like I saved the screenshot. With the same settings, both of them are showing the estimated max CCL as 660 nits. But I don't know if you can tell, there's more pop with the Special K version than the Auto HDR. Auto HDR looks like it has just a slight bit of a haze over the whole thing. It's very subtle. I don't even know if you're going to be able to see it. But it's a little bit more, how do I say, like yellow around it. It's not yellow is probably not the right word, but this just seems like it's correct, and this one seems like it's not as correct. And it looked really good before, but it doesn't look as good now. And if we look at the luminance heat map, this is where you're going to see a lot of difference here. You're going to see more, and it might have just really been where I took a picture of the sky. There could be a lot of factors here because it's not the exact same screenshot. Yeah, even if I take a different one, it's still bright. But I was only looking at the sky here, whereas here I was looking somewhat at the bottom and somewhat at the sky. But there's so much more orange on this Special K screenshot than there is on the Auto HDR screenshot. And it's not any better or worse. It's just showing that there is more brightness in the scene, even with the right CCL. I mean, it's just where I happen to take the photo. There's more brightness over in this section. Maybe if this one, I looked up the sky, I'd see more over here too. The point of this was to show that there is a difference between Auto HDR and Special K and Native HDR. Native HDR, you have to be more tricky on making sure you configure it correctly. Auto HDR just does it automatically, but it's upscaling from an 8-bit or 10-bit SDR instead of a native HDR from in the game engine. And then you have Special K, which can get its hooks into the native game engine, but then you control the sliders on what the peak brightness is and what the paper white value is. Paper white is essentially your SDR white. So if you see white, that's your SDR white. They look very similar. You probably couldn't even tell the difference in most cases. It's possible that this is a little bit yellow tinted because of where I took the screenshot versus this one. They are different. The balloon is lower here. The balloon is higher over here. You can barely see it. And this one has a little bit of the sun in there, which could be affecting some of the scene's overall brightness. But I do think in general, the Special K ones have a little bit more pop. I also do believe from other testing that the color grading is correct. This is just an intro video on this channel just to show some stuff off, but the color grading is definitely different in Auto HDR than native SDR. And when you use Special K, you get the correct color grading. So I do recommend using Special K if you want to set it up. I also recommend Auto HDR if you don't have Special K. I prefer HDR over many other things. And this is just one game I'm looking at. This is just Hitman 3, what HDR looks like in the 3 different modes: native, Special K, and Auto HDR. And the only reason I'm showing this is just to show you what it looks like to have those 3 modes and how to even control them and enable them, and how I took the screenshot in the HDR mode without it having that gray haze over it. See, this was the gray haze that you would have gotten if you took that screenshot without Special K, and this is what it looks like with Special K. Special K is not doing anything. It's not doing any special processing or anything, but it hooks into the game engine, and I passed through all the HDR information through Special K, which means now when you take a screenshot, the game doesn't need to be an exclusive full screen for it to look correct with HDR. And because of that, if you put an overlay over the screen, then it doesn't mess it up like it does over here. This gray looks awful, and it's because there was something over the screen and Hitman didn't have exclusive full screen access. But with the HDR running through Special K, then you can take those screenshots because the exclusive full screen thing doesn't matter as much. It's so much better. I mean, this is almost identical screenshot between the two, and you can see the difference. Now, when I'm looking at it, with or without Special K, it looks like the left. It does not look like the right. I do not see the right at all. There are some YouTube videos about people saying the gray floor is heightened and whatever. Maybe it is. It might be. But I don't see the right image unless I have an overlay on top of the screen or I'm taking a screenshot or something like that. It's the only time I see it look like this. It always looks like this on the left for me. Now again, this is not as bright as the other images, but that could be because I just didn't configure the game correctly. All right, thank you very much for popping in and watching this. Hope you had a good time watching and you learned something out of this. There is a lot of interesting things with HDR. There are a lot of things to learn. Ask your questions in the comments. I'll hopefully be able to answer them and then give you some information on how you can understand what HDR really is and how it works, because I've been studying this for at least 8 months now, and I've been working on it every night, just about trying to play with it, mess with it, try games out, test things, switch modes, do whatever, try this new technology to figure out if it fixes something that I was having, how to enable HDR in games that didn't have it, especially once I went to Windows 11 last month. I went through a whole spree of how can I make everything HDR. All right,